Hi peeps, this is the room I'm going to use when I'm working on metal like grinding and welding and things like that. As you can see, when I started yesterday, the room was full of stuff that I had laying around there from when I moved into the workshop. So I just had to start clearing out the room, taking out everything and putting it out in the main room of the workshop. Also, the lathe had to be carried out of the room. It's a very heavy lathe. But I got it out by myself, even though I recommend that you perhaps are two people on that job. My trusted Tormak that I use to sharpen all my knives and blades, I have on this red drawer unit, so I just roll that out of the room. Now I had to remove the workbench top, so I could start to dismantle the workbench. The two metal drawer units I had in the workbench I took out after I unscrewed some screws, and then I had to remove a lot more screws so I could dismantle the old wood workbench. I got quite a lot of materials for some other project from this workbench. Yeah. So now that the room is empty, I can tell you what my plan is for this episode. On the model here in Fusion 360, you see that I have a workbench top here, which is going to house my metal lathe. This workbench top is going to be made out of some perforated metal that I have laying around, and underneath I'm going to use tubular steel for support down here. If you want to see some of this in more detail, I recommend you go into my Instagram and check out my feed there. Now that the room is all cleared out, I have to start on this masonry wall. This masonry wall is built out of these light blocks, and I want to do the same thing as I did in the main room and cover these walls with some masonry plaster, so it will be a smooth and even surface and ready for me to use in the metal room. I started laying out some old plastic and paper to cover the floors. This is because it's going to be easier for me later on to clean the floor when I'm finished. After I have covered the floors, I mixed up some mortar using approximately the same ratio that was recommended. The only thing is that I left the mortar mix somewhat thick. This way it's easier to apply on the leca bricks. I started by applying the mortar mix on a tray and applying it to the wall from the floor and up. On the top of the wall I laid the mortar mix with my hands and pressed it down with my hands. I found out this was the easiest way without the mortar getting loose and getting on the floor. After I pressed down the mortar mix with my hands, I could use the tray tool and even it out and get a smooth surface. I continued this work all the way to the end of the wall, trying to get as smooth a surface as I could. Although I know this doesn't look like a professional did it, my only experience with mortar mix is the wall I did in the main room outside the metal room. Okay, after I was happy with the finish and the surface, I removed the plastic and paper I had on the floor. And when that was done, I took a plastic scrape and I scraped the excess mortar down by the floor just to get a more smooth finish down to the floor. After that was done, I could use my broom and clean the floor out. Okay, now that the brick mortar is all dried up, I'm going to start building the bench I'm going to have for the metal lathe. My plan here is to use these metal pipes, 2.5 centimeters times 2.5 centimeters. I'm going to use these steel beams and make a frame that is going to be supported by the wall on this side and go like this and like a square frame with the inner pipe here. I'm going to use this sort of metal like a tabletop. I have a couple of sheets of this. It is supposed to be a wall-mounted metal sheet with holes, but as you can see, this is quite sturdy And you have these supporting pieces underneath, which make this quite strong. So I'm going to use this kind of metal and lay it on top of the frame here. And that way I'm going to get a good supported lathe workbench here. Yeah, so let's start. First, I had to clean the tubular steel because it came out of the factory with some kind of oil on it. I cleaned it off using some brake cleaner. When that was done, I could lay the tubular steel down on the floor and measure out the length I needed. I wanted 2 long pieces for the front and the back. And I wanted 3 shorter pieces, 2 the sides and 1 in the middle. When I had cut all the pieces I needed, I laid them down on the floor using some wooden pieces that were straight. In the corners I used these magnetic angles, those are 90 degrees and 45 degrees. Then I started to weld it. I welded one side first, and when I was happy with that side I turned it around and welded the other side, and then I welded the corners. After that, I used my angle grinder and I grind off the excess welds. When the whole frame was finished, I could put it in place and test fit it and make the holes for the attachment screws. After I had drilled the holes for the attachment screws, I could take the whole frame outside and paint it with some black paint. Then I could take the frame inside and attach it. On the one side where I only had one screw in the wall attached, I fitted a piece of pipe down the wooden strut and I attached that metal piece with 2 long screws just to get a more support for the bench top. When that was done, I could measure out the tabletop, which I was taking out of these perforated metal sheets I had laying around. Then I could cut the perforated metal sheets, and when that was done I could put it in place, and underneath I used some shims just to get the support I needed. From my old workbench I had these 2 drawer units. So I emptied out the 2 drawer units, taking out all the drawers. Those are originally from a car inventory. And I put them on top of each other so I could attach them to each other. I used some thick aluminum brackets underneath to attach them together. On the sides I drilled a hole and just attached them with some bolts. When that was done, I attached 4 casters, each taking approximately 40 kilos of weight, and attached them to the 4 corners of the drawer unit. Then I could turn the drawer unit around, and on the top I put this shelf metal unit, which was from the original interior of the car where I got the drawer units. Put in all the drawers again. And here you see the result. So this is going to be the base for my metal lathe, and I have the drawer units here for some storage for stuff. And now the plan for this room is to start on the finishing trims. You see I have this window. This plastic is from the moist barrier I put on before I put on the OSB walls that is underneath the plaster boards. I want to put some finishing trim around the frame of the window, and when that's done I want some finishing trim on top here. Everything I want to paint in this color. To do this I'm thinking about just using some OSB scrap, putting it around, painting it all finished up here. And I also have the same problem around this inside window. I want to put finishing trim around the whole window here using OSB scrap. Then when that's finished I put some OSB trims on the front around the whole window. And of course I also want to just paint this in the same color as the wall. Yeah, so that's the plan now for this room. So let's start with that. Yeah! you.